Today we're going to factor a quadratic expression. So how do I know that it's a quadratic? First off, I look and I see that its highest degree is a 2. So let me write that down. This is the highest degree is 2. Therefore, I know that it is a quadratic. It's an expression because there's no equal sign. So the other thing I want to see is it in standard form? So standard form, remember, I'm going to write this here, standard form is ax squared plus bx plus c. So we can see we have descending exponents, 2, 1, and then 0. So I have 2, 1, and then 0. So I have it set up correctly to factor. So what I'm going to do can only be done with quadratics. So the first thing I'm going to ask myself is, does it have a greatest common factor? Also known as a GCF. And the answer is yes. If I look here, I have a 9, 9, and a negative 18. So my greatest common factor is 9. So that means then that I can divide a 9. It has to be out of every term, not just the ones that look good. Can't throw it away, so I'm undistributing. I'm bringing that to the front. So that means that this is a 9, and then what am I left with on the inside after I divide? Well, 9 divided by 9 is 1, so I'm left with x squared. 9 divided by 9 is 1, so I'm left with x. And negative 18 divided by 9 is negative 2. So for the sake of avoiding confusion, the only thing I'm factoring is what's inside this parentheses. I'm going to draw an arrow with my 9 down to the bottom somewhere for my answer, and I'm going to write the number 9, and then I know I'm going to have two binomials that multiply together. So that will help me not to forget that 9. That's very important. Okay. So now that I've looked for my greatest common factor and I've taken it out, I'm only factoring what's inside the parentheses. So let's just rewrite this. So this is x squared plus x minus 2. I'm going to set up my little factoring x, multiplication sign on top, addition sign on the bottom. So how do I figure out what's on the top? I'm going to multiply the first term times the last term. So that gives me negative 2x squared. So let's write that here. This comes from multiplying the first and last term. And then my middle term gets put down here in the bottom. So this here is my middle term. Okay, so the whole reason we're doing this is because what I need is these numbers that come right in there. That's where it's important. So I want to know, what are my factors of negative 2x squared that add up to x? So let's break this down into number factor and letter factor. So I'm going to write here factors is what I'm looking for. So my factors of x squared would be x times x. So that means I know I'm going to have an x here, and I know I'm going to have an x here. I left a space for a number. Now I want my factors of negative 2. Well, that could be negative 1 times 2, or it could be 1 times negative 2. I have a choice. So I have to pick the factors that add up to positive 1. Well, when I add these two up, I get positive 1. When I add these two up, I get negative 1, which means I want to choose that set right there. So that means I'm going to have negative 1x and 2x, because when I add negative x and 2x, I get positive x. That's taking the place of that number right there. So now I'm going to simply copy this down, so that's x squared. I'm replacing that with negative 1x plus 2x, and then I'm bringing down my last term, which is negative 2. Now I'm going to factor by grouping. So I'm going to set up my group. I'm going to ask myself, what's a common factor in my first group? Simply x. It's the only thing I can factor out of both. So let's not forget that has to be written here. Then what do I have? So I have x squared divided by x, which gives me x. And I have negative 1x divided by x. X divided by x is 1, so 1 times negative 1 is negative 1. So then I'm looking here. What's a common factor between 2x and negative 2? A common factor is 2. So that's a positive 2. Can't throw it away. It comes out in front. And then I divide. 2x divided by 2 is x. Negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. So if you notice, these two are the same exact number in parentheses, x minus 1, x minus 1. That has to be that way, or I've made a mistake somewhere, and I have to go back and I have to see if I'm factoring out the right thing, or I need to see if I forced this somehow to make it work and this was wrong. So now x minus 1 and x minus 1 is the same number, so I can divide out x minus 1 from both terms. So that's x minus 1. So when I do x minus 1 divided by x minus 1, that gives me 1. So 1 times x is x. And so the same thing here. X minus 1 divided by x minus 1 is 1. So 1 times 2 gives me plus 2. So there I have it. I have just factored my quadratic expression. So this here is now in factored form.